When you go through the depths of the dark valley and you find him, forget about finding yourself. You get into the valley. When you encounter the king of the cosmos, you don't pay attention to yourself.
Preston, it's really a joy to finally meet you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Chris. Really excited to have the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I typically have a question one ready to go, and I do, but you said something to me 2 minutes ago that I'm like, yeah, we got to start here. You mentioned the phrase kingdom concrete and really how the foundations have had cracks in them for the last 5 years. Just biopsy this moment in time, because I really want to take the deep dive and point folks to maturity today.
Yeah, I think while COVID had many challenges for all of us and for the church, capital C at large, all over the earth, I also think that God in his grace used it to expose some things that needed to be exposed. The cracks were there long before COVID happened. And I think my personal philosophy is over the 20 to 25 years before COVID, what many would call the mega movement was just blowing and going. And especially what we saw in our country, the United States, building the church was easier than it had been in decades. I mean, it was just, you'd look in the direction of a field and thousands of people would be in it within 24 months. There was more provision. And I think the average believer, the average pastor, the average church would have said before COVID, we're all doing awesome. And then the storm came, and I believe God used it to reveal we were not as healthy as we thought. And part of the reason was we had built on some of the wrong things. And so when the storm came, I mean, Jesus is really clear. What happens when you build on the rock? What happens when you build on the sand? The only way for a structure to come down in a storm is if it was built on the wrong thing. And we got hammered. And I think it was a really good thing that it's the refiner's fire. That's how I see it. And the kingdom concrete, it's just, he is the rock. He is the cornerstone. And he said, I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And the implication there is whatever Jesus doesn't build will be torn down. But whatever he does build cannot be torn down.
We've built on the wrong things. I want to stay there. So this is a mental health, emotional health podcast. There are people listening who are burnt out. They're trying to hurdle things like fear, anxiety. My aim here is transformation. I don't want people to...
Love it.
I don't do this show because I want people to feel better. I want people to become whole, right?
Love it.
Talk to me in this vein then, Preston, in your experience working with people for as long as you have. What are the wrong things we've built our lives upon that even play into the context of this conversation, in your view?
It's a great question. I think the bucket of crutches is huge. And what I've learned as a Christ follower, not just as a vocational minister for nearly 25 years, is oftentimes God loves to walk us through the wilderness or through the storms of life. And one of the top things on his list, I believe, that he wants to accomplish in the wilderness as he leads us through is to remove any and every crutch. And a crutch is anything which can be leaned on in place of Christ. And so some people, it just, if we take an inventory, what do I chase when I need a hit? Some people get online and buy stuff. Some people seek out unhealthy relationships and outside of the boundaries of a biblical framework. Some people seek out a heightened measure of anger or whatever. A crutch can be anything, to be honest. And I think some of us built our lives on things that please the flesh. And, if Jesus was led through the wilderness to kick off his run, then I think all of us should assume we're going to spend some time in the wilderness. And I have learned one of my favorite things. I will go into a wilderness season having no idea the crutches that I am leaning on.
Ah, right.
And the desert exposes any and every crutch. And it's actually his love that says, Preston, I want to take you on a walk that crutches can't survive. And so it's, a lot of people lament the wilderness, quote unquote, the storms of life. I actually think some of God's best work is done in us, in the storms of life, in the wilderness.
Why?
I think because he has our full attention. I go back to 9/11. I was a young pastor.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
And I think I was 21, 22 years old. And I remember when 9/11 happened, the small, tiny little church that we had started that had about 60 people, so many people who had never been to our church before started just filling the place, so much so that we had to create midweek prayer services because the appetite got so big so fast. And what I learned was some of life's most difficult circumstances actually show us what we knew we should have been doing the entire time before the storm started. That's why I think God does some of his best work, because when times are easy, what is our flesh prone to do? Take shortcuts.
Oh, yeah.
We try and get away with a little bit more because everything's awesome. But once the winds kick up, and if the winds really kick up, and maybe it's an economic catastrophe, maybe it's war in an area, when things get so scary, what happens? What church history would say? Many call on the name of the Lord. And so I at 26, I lamented the wilderness. At 46, it's become one of my favorite places to live.
How do you find, in your experience, how do you learn, again, this is the metaphor, and perhaps even I'm thinking about Elijah, 1 Kings 19, and we could take ourselves to multiple stories, examples in the scriptures. How do you find water in the rock, so to speak? I've got a two-part question, but I want to start there. When you're in the wilderness and your senses are saying, I have been abandoned, I am alone, I can't sense him, I can't feel him, I have a reflex to self-protect, to self-promote, to lean on my own understanding and act with an independent spirit. How do you move in the opposite spirit of all that to find the water in the rock, the sustenance in the wilderness? Or is it brought to us?
Well, I think part of it is we have to come to the end of ourselves. When I realize I can't make water come out of the rock, then where do I fall? On the rock upon which I stand. It's where I'm going to fall. I'm not going to lean. I'm going to fall. I went through, when I was in my early 20s, a 9-month period where I didn't feel like I heard the Lord speak one time. And it was because of my own pride. I didn't realize it at the time. But going without what felt like a morsel of his word, a morsel of a syllable of his voice, honestly framed the rest of my life. And it created an insatiable appetite where I just won't let it go too long. When I was young, I would see how long I could go without living water. At 46, I have learned I will die without it. And so to really answer the question, I think the more desperate we become, the more divine his response.
What does it mean in practical terms, experiential terms, perhaps, coming to the end of ourselves? We've heard that a lot. It's in our lexicon of Christian vernacular, and I think it's appropriate and it's very right. How has that played out to you? What does it look like for the average disciple of Jesus who's listening today to say, hey, you know what? I'm in this liminal state. I feel a lot of tension and adversity, and what I hear you saying is, let it happen, because our reflex is to fight against it.
Absolutely. Absolutely let it happen. I mean, this is some of the deepest connections I've ever experienced with the Lord came when I had nothing left to bring to the table. And it is in those moments where I learn, Lord, I have nothing to bring but myself. And I I mean, to be honest, when I was young, I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I could do it by myself. And in his grace, he let me go through some really hard knocks so that I would cling to the hem of his garment. And if he has to drag me, I will be the woman with the issue of blood for the rest of my life if I have to. I will be the woman who said, yeah, but even the dogs get the crumbs. When you go through the depths of the dark valley and you find him, forget about finding yourself. I don't. You get into the valley.
Come on, Preston.
When you encounter the King of the cosmos, you don't pay attention to yourself. You are so captivated by his glory, by his magnificence, by his power, his sovereignty. And I think for me, and I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, I think the most practical thing that can happen, John said it probably better than anybody. I've got to decrease so that he might increase. And for us, the implication is increase in me and through me. Well, the less of my flesh there is, the less there is to get in his way as he wants to move through me. And so this is why, people that run with me hear me talk about, the people of God are a people of the cut. The Bible is described as a sword which divides between joint and marrow, bone and marrow. This is heaven's surgical knife that was meant to cut on my flesh so that the Holy Spirit could use it as part of the ongoing work of sanctification to make me look more like Jesus. And sometimes I have to come to the end of myself, quote unquote, and realize apart from him, not only can I do nothing, I am nothing.
I've got like a 3-part question sort of brewing right now, and I haven't really even gotten to question 1, and I love it already. So, what misconceptions come into play in our lives that keep us fighting against his pull into the wilderness? Like, we're going whether or not we want it to or not, but we often go kicking and screaming. What are the misconceptions that we often harbor? And then how does deception come in to tell us we're in a season that is anything but what it really is?
Great questions. I think the biggest misconception is we go into the wilderness thinking some huge, semi-angry, judgmental God is punishing us by taking us into the wilderness rather than as a friend. See, the way I see the wilderness is like this. My heart has heard you say, come away with me. And my heart responds saying, Lord, I am coming. When he leads us out into a wilderness season, my personal perspective is he's getting us away. So think of it from an intimate perspective. The King of the cosmos is saying, for this season, I don't want to share you with anyone else. And so I'm going to take you to the backside of the mountain like I did with Moses, like I did with David before he became king, Jesus out in the wilderness before he was tempted and went out for ministry. This is how he does what he does. The misconception is in anger, he's punishing us, and the wilderness is a tool of punishment. No, it's not. It's actually a vehicle of intimacy. When we come out of the wilderness, think about it. Jesus was filled with the power of the Spirit and went to do mighty things. And John said a book couldn't even
contain the full
a
measure.
world filled with books couldn't even contain all the things Jesus did, which I did not refer to.
Yeah.
So I think that's the misconception. If we would just follow him into the places that scare us the most, I think we would see sides of him we want to see the most.
That is such a provocative statement. What's required of us to embody that as truth and not just a pithy statement that sounds good And then when we're done listening to Preston and Chris on the pod, we go about life as usual.
Yeah, I think Jesus was just such a savage as he, those 3 years, walked the face of the earth. Think about this. One day he says to everybody walking with him, you can't run with me unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. That's a provocative statement. I mean, and what happened? Some walked away from him. And then he turns to the 12 and he says, how about y'all? Anybody want to go? Knowing full well that this is the hard way. This path that he has laid out before us was designed to kill us. Not physically, spiritually. It was designed to kill my flesh. I just don't think we have an awareness of how detrimental the flesh is to our everyday life. And so when you say, practically speaking, how do we go away from this? Here's what I tell people all the time. If you want real confidence that you are following the guidance of the Holy Spirit more than you are walking in the flesh, here's a great litmus test. What percentage of the time are you doing the things you least want to do? So we adopted our 6-year-old son, who we had fostered for half of his life before we adopted him. And to be very honest, when I proposed to my wife 26 years ago, I laid out a plan of being empty nesters before 50 years old. Like, I was on one knee, and I described, here's how it's going to go. Like, I laid it out. And my wife oversees a ministry here at our church that comes alongside young women who get pregnant in an unplanned fashion. And one of the mothers called us in the middle of the night one night and said, CPS is taking my son from me. Will you take him? And so we took him until COVID. He went back at COVID, and then he came back. And, buddy, I'm 46, about to be 47. My youngest, that Holly and I gave birth to, is in his last semester of high school. The plan was, we were running it to a T. And how often does the Spirit of God break in and say, there is something I want you to do, and it's going to hurt beyond anything you've ever done before. Bigger than any offering, bigger than any sacrifice. There is something I want you to do. To be honest, Chris, the way I heard it real time was like that. But now, almost a year later, since the adoption, here's how I see it. I think what he actually might have said was, there are some things I would like to see developed in you. And the only way I can develop these things in you to make you look more like the Son of God is for you to give me your plan and to adopt this little boy. And it's been life-changing, because I'm just telling you, the older I get, the more I run towards the thing I least want to do. Because oftentimes what my flesh least wants to do, the Spirit of God most wants to do.
The older I get, I run to the things I least want to do. I want to put a pin in this question I had about mountains and maturity, because you were talking about Jesus and the backside of the mountain. I want to go there, but I want to ask you about this next, because I think it's pivotal. You're 46, about to turn 47. What are you learning in this season of midlife that you could have never anticipated on your best day in your 20s and 30s? And how has the transition been for you?
That's a really solid question. I mean, for me personally, the last 2 years has served as a really big transition. Life transition, ministry transition, relational transitions. And
will you share to the extent you're comfortable? I just know a lot of people joined with us today, Preston, are right there, late 30s, early 40s, going, oh no.
Yeah, I just don't think we're as aware as we think we are of the crutches we lean on that get in the way of us fully leaning on him. And So for me, some of that was relational. There were some relationships that I was probably leaning on a little bit too much and probably needed a good storm or two to help me see some things clearly. As far as in ministry, for the first 10 and a half years of my time as a senior pastor, the Lord had said, I want you in hiding. I don't want anyone to know you exist, Preston. I'm going to take you out back, and it's going to be just the two of us. And it was a dream come true. It's a hard way to build a church, to be honest, but and not a bad way at all. Just a little bit more of a challenging way. And then about 2 years ago, I felt the Lord very strongly lead me out of hiding and into a little bit more of a public space, which I kind of knew at some point in my life would come, but by the time we got there, I didn't want it. And I think if I were to go back and talk to the young me who felt like he knew the call that God had given him, Chris, I've grown up in the church, and I don't know how many who are joining us, that's their experience, but I'll speak to my own. Having grown up in the church, there's a lot of talk about the call of God. You know, and when we're younger, we talk about it in such big, robust terms, in part because we're actually walking in a little bit of insecurity, and if we don't describe what God created us to do as big, then it makes us look small. And now at 46, I will tell you, the greatest call any child of God will ever receive is the call to be best friends with the King of the universe. It trumps anything I will ever do in my life on his behalf or with him. Our friendship is more important than anything I will do on his behalf. And so I think part of the beautiful journey of following Jesus is waking up to the realization and the revelation of what he said to his disciples. I want you to know I don't see you as my servants. I see you as my friends. And that's why he goes on in John 15 to say, greater love hath no man than to lay his life down for his friends. Not his father's children, not his servants, his friends. This is what we're after. Friendship with God.
How many of us then depend too much on the I feel called to this and I don't feel called to that? Like I was thinking as you were sharing about Abraham, when the Lord said to Abraham, leave everything that's familiar, go to a land that I'm going to show you afterward. I'm not really sure. Like, did Abraham feel the call, or was he just willing to say yes and faithfully follow the next right move?
It's a great question. I think Abraham and Moses are really good examples. They both become friends with God. And they neither of them knew how it would all end up. And so I think they both realized that the jackpot isn't the promised land. You know, it isn't the place where, you know, we read Genesis 12 and it's like, oh man, that's a dramatic setup. There's going to be this dramatic reveal of the place and it's going to be this divine ta-da. And what I think we find is it was less about the place and it was more about the proximate relationship. God was, think about it. He says, go to the land I will show you.
Yeah.
The implication is, just like it was with Moses and the people of God as they wandered through the wilderness, following the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night.
Yep.
The implication is, I want to go with you and I want you to go with me. And I'm just telling you, as a 21-year-old, Chris, I was so destination focused.
Oh, same. Without a doubt.
Because the destination would explain to everyone why I was important. That's how I saw it. You know, I was just dealing with unbridled insecurity. At 46, one of the things I say is, it's okay no matter how you see me. When I was young, I used to say, I don't care how you see me. Now I say, it's okay no matter how you see me. I just pray that you would see Jesus in some way. in me and through me. And the goal of my life is to be best friends with God.
And I venture with that comes a desire to be counted faithful and one who can be trusted by him as well.
For sure. I think his closest friends are the most trustworthy. Think about your closest friends, just relationally from a human perspective. The people closest to you are probably the people you can trust the most. That trust and intimate fellowship go hand in hand. If I can't trust you, we can't be close.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
And so I think that is part of the price of admission. I've got to live in such a way that he can trust me.
Yes. I want to go back to, you were talking about mountains, and you used a few different examples. What is it about mountains as a metaphor for maturity? Here's why I ask that question, because I read Psalm 24, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord?
Only
He with
those
clean hands, pure hearts,
Yeah.
and he who does not lift up his soul to that which is false.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about mountains as a metaphor for maturity in your life, even as you've had to scale mountains that include adversity, challenges, hurdling deception, hurdling, Lord, your timing makes no sense right now. It's like when you're scaling the mountain, you don't see clarity, and I think too many believers were like so dependent on clarity, and the Lord says, no, I'll be with you. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, I think part of the reason it involves a climb is because if we were truly put on some divine people mover where we didn't have to move, it would require no faith.
Yeah.
The journey necessitates faith. And so you're going to climb some sides of the hill. Think about it. 1 Samuel 14, Jonathan and the armor bearer, before he goes up and sees one of the great miracles of his lifetime where he sees God move in his behalf, what precedes it? On hands and knees, he crawls up with a teenage boy behind him, crawls up in a prone position where his enemy has the high ground. That's the safe place. Like he's breaking all of the rules, and yet they get to the top. God is with them. They take out 24, and then fear sweeps through the entire. There's something about following him on the tough parts of the climb where we want to quit, where we see him in a way we wouldn't see him just walking on the flat ground. And so he takes us up into the higher places. We need more oxygen. Look at if you were to climb Everest, you get to a point where most people, if they don't have oxygen, it will kill them. Again, the entire Christian life is meant to create complete reliance on him. And the reason I think we have to go higher is when we're doing it well with him, we start to get a level of mastery at the altitude we're at. And it's funny how he works. Just as we start to dominate at the new level, he goes, okay, now we're going to go higher. And there's even less oxygen, Preston. And you're going to need to rely on me even more. This is the beauty of our walk with Jesus. I can't do it without him.
Yeah, the Christian life isn't difficult. It's impossible.
Literally.
Yeah.
So many theologians
Yeah.
throughout the years have said Christianity was meant to be impossible so that you could not pull it off apart from his spirit.
Mm-hmm. So what's the biggest thing keeping believers spiritually immature today?
Ooh. I don't want to blame, because I know everyone needs to own that. But I do think, just like in the days of Ezekiel, it's possible. I'll present it like this. It's possible that the priests are playing a role in the problem. I'll be as sweet as I possibly can. I think the mega movement really tested the vocational priests, quote unquote, in the house of the Lord. And you see in Ezekiel's day, when the priests are not walking in the manner in which God asked them to. We see it time and time again, actually, not just in Ezekiel's life, but throughout the Old Testament with the people of God. When the priests got wonky, the people did too. It went hand in hand.
Yep.
And I think it's possible we lowered the bar in the name of getting more people through the door. And I actually think my children's generation, what I see them craving is actually us raising the bar. Call me to something that actually is impossible. Because there's something in them that feels called to something they can't accomplish in their own strength. So don't lower the bar for me. I think part of what we saw with the deconstructionism movement was they saw, an entire generation saw, this can't be the faith of the Bible. It's too shakeable. It's too flimsy. This isn't what I read about. Now, the way it's been torn apart, may not be the best way, but I think the heart behind it was what is the biblical faith of the early days in Acts 2, 3, and 4 and beyond, and even before that. I think immaturity has become so normal because we've gotten so disconnected from God's word. And unfortunately, when the bar gets lowered, it gets easier and easier to keep lowering it.
Immaturity has been normalized, and that's really fascinating to me, because as I think about deconstruction and all of that, I think one of the things I'm learning as I study it and watch it, and we're presented with a biblical version, metanoia. But what I see in so many people, Preston, is when the building comes down, the metaphor is the building comes down, what's left is the foundation. And what I see is a lack of historical Christian orthodoxy, the scriptures, and then that sort of says, here I come, self-directed spirituality.
Right.
Here I come, as you said earlier in the conversation, forget finding yourself. Because we're sold a bill of goods that says, become your highest, best, most authentic self, even in this space. I have to be so clear on this podcast because it's a mental health podcast. And people are like, great, I'm going to bring all of my spiritual tropes. And I'm like, no, this has nothing to do with woo-woo spirituality.
It's great.
It's about discipleship.
That's right.
It's about formation. It's about spiritual maturity. You want to connect those thoughts for me? Or at least give me your take as a pastor on what you've seen in when the building comes down and the foundation is revealed and you see, oh, they never had historical Christian orthodoxy, a value for the scriptures as authoritative to begin with. What's your biopsy on that?
Yeah, well, number one, I think we need more Bereans. I just think we have too many believers that are moving in opinion apart from I wonder if we did a poll with the average pew sitter in the church, we'll just say with our country, how many of them over the last 12 months of their lives have read something from someone who is no longer alive?
Great question.
I think we'd be shocked.
Yep.
And I'm not just talking about the Bible. Those who gave their lives to pouring through the scriptures and chasing after God, there are so many great ones. And yet we're living in this bubble of our day it's that recency bias, that today is bigger than any other day before this day. And it's just a measure of arrogance that misses so much beauty of God's faithfulness throughout the centuries. So I think, one thing is we need more Bereans. There's no doubt. Number two, we need more biblical community. I think just because we gather doesn't mean we commune. And I think it's one of the things that got exposed in the mega movement during COVID. If it was that easy to break us all up, the bond we built wasn't actually real to begin with. Because we were gathering. The vast majority was gathering and not communing. When we commune, it's like Ecclesiastes 4. It's like a cord of three strands, which is what? Not easily broken. but we were so easy to break apart. So I think the second thing I would say is we need more biblical community. And if that means we need to get smaller to get stronger, then so be it, Lord. Who cares about size?
Do you think that's happening right now? Did you see that happening?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. I think the full era of the mega quote unquote movement will come to an end in less than 10 years. I think a lot as we see that generation of communicators and pastors transition into retirement, I think many of the multi-site churches will probably go autonomous.
That was my next question. What happens to multi-campus? Does it go away? Yeah.
I think they will become, most of the campuses will become autonomous, or some of the stronger campus pastors may become regional pastors.
Wow.
I just think it's going to end up looking even more. I'm not anti-mega. I grew up in it.
Same.
There's a lot of good in it. I don't want to see it torn down. I just want to see it keep getting stronger and stronger.
That's right.
And, I think what we're about to see is a new measure of biblical community.
Yeah, like when you go to a doctor and you break a bone, and sometimes they have to re-break the bone so it heals stronger. Do you think the Lord is superintending and has sanctioned a break, so to speak?
Absolutely.
Just last night, I meet with a 70-year-old man every Wednesday night for just personal growth and mentoring.
Love it.
I get home last night, and I'm getting ready for work the next day, or today, I should say, and flipping on YouTube, and a very well-known pastor that you and I both are very familiar with, his mugshot just showed up on YouTube last night, and I stopped cold in my tracks.
Yeah.
It took my breath away.
We can say, that's my mentor.
I know.
That's the man who raised me in ministry. Yeah.
How are you right now? If I don't, you can share to the extent you're comfortable. I don't mean, I had no intention of going there, but how are you doing with all of that?
Obviously, it's really hard. And this is somebody who, in ministry, raised me. A lot of the way I would say it, we're so caught up in all this cancel culture, and I'm not speaking to the specific act or acts which he was indicted for, but I'm speaking overall, this cancellation culture. I'm really wrestling through it. And for me personally, I can't speak for everyone else, but I would say the Lord's really helped me to see how much the Lord did through Robert in my life. And if I were to cancel everything, then I'd be throwing away some really holy moments that I had with the Lord that Robert was a really big part of. And so, I talked about it this weekend with our church, and I said, love isn't tested when someone feels the most lovable. Love is actually tested when someone feels the least lovable. And I just want to look like Jesus. And I stood before, I appealed to the younger generation, Chris, this weekend, and I said, listen to me. I believe that generation and my grandchildren's generation will see the last great move of God on the earth before Jesus returns. And I appealed to them and said, please don't convince yourself that sin will not have consequence. Yes, there is grace and forgiveness from the Lord. And sin always has a consequence. And it's never worth it. Whatever the sin is, it is never worth the price of admission. The consequence never is. And so I'm navigating a lot of different things. I try to make space. It's heartbreaking for people for whom that serves as a trigger, because in their childhood, they had something happen to them. And you and I both know there's a lot of that. That's heartbreaking. And it's just excruciating. For a lot of people, it's about something he did 40 years ago. I have a much greater context of the last 25 years. And I believe God is personally pursuing Robert relationally and calling him back to a measure of who he was before Gateway even started that will probably be difficult to get back to, excruciating. But again, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, it's not about what I do. He wants me by his side. The God of the universe wants me by his side. And when I wander, he'll stop at nothing to bring me back.
He'll stop at nothing to bring me back. And folks, right now, many of you are listening saying, like, Preston, I think it's easy to misdiagnose the dealings of the Lord in our life, and we end up thinking we're rebuking the enemy, and the Lord's like, that's me, buddy.
Right.
That's me. Anything else for you? I want to walk very respectfully through this. I had no intention of even going here.
No,
but
it's okay.
Any other soul prompts, guardrails, learnings that you and your wife are having to say, we have to readjust? What's the Lord doing in your soul? And how would you educate all of us today when you walk through a crisis, a shocking experience such as the one you have? How do you walk through this, keeping your eyes on the Lord and not being distracted by, disillusioned by what you see with your eyes?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, that came out on Monday, a couple days ago, and from when we're filming this, and the indictment came a couple days before that, and the day after the indictment came, I was spending some time alone with the Lord in my prayer closet, and to be honest, had a really special encounter with the Lord, and to the extent that I told my wife, I've never felt him that close in my life. So close that it was for me like an Isaiah 6 moment where I just started weeping in the presence of the Lord because I became so aware of my own sin. And I mean, it was a woe is me. I am a man of unclean lips. And it was all day. I mean, I just wept throughout the day. And I think one of the things I'm learning is how genius it is that the Lord said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Now listen, I will say that is not to justify anyone's sin whatsoever. I would never justify that sin in my wildest dreams. I am not making a case for that. But it's hard for me to wrap my mind around being in that moment where Jesus looks at everyone and says, I know how dirty she looks to all of you. We don't even know how clothed she was. I mean, Scripture says she was caught in the act.
That's it. Right.
In the act. In the middle.
Right.
So we don't know how clothed she was. And you just see Jesus saying, I get it. She's filthy. And to some of you, she's repulsive. And to some of you women in the crowd, she stands for everything that you stand against. I get it. But I still stand with her. I love her. Her sin was never right. But I am going to die for these very sins. And I'm not going to throw this rock at her. I'm going to let it be thrown at me. I'm just seeing moments like that very differently. And making space for people to hate him for the rest of their lives. I get it. It's not my job to convince anyone. But I'm just trying my best to look more like Jesus. And Chris, I'll tell you, to really answer your question, pride, I just think it's the Achilles heel of all of our flesh. And it's so easy. One of the ways pride rears its ugly head is to focus on the sin of another. And I just don't want to live my life like that. I want justice. I want the Lord to get his way. Whatever he wants, I want him to get his way in all things, including with me and anything that needs to be done with me. And I don't want to fixate on the sins of others in such a way that it causes me to forget my own and my desperate need for my Savior.
So this is interesting. If the enemy, and this has no connection to Robert Morris or what we've been talking about. If the enemy wanted to destroy someone's life in the most subtle way possible, how would he do it?
Oh, I think he would do it the exact same way that he did it to himself. Pride was the original sin. Now, it wasn't man's original sin, but theologically speaking, pride was the original sin. It got him kicked out of the garden and a third of the angels. I think because pride cost Lucifer everything, I think it's one of the reasons why he so consistently uses it in the life of humans and especially believers. Because remember, pride created the distance between him and God. He was thrown from God's presence. And that's his goal for us. He wants the same thing that happened to him to happen to us. That's what hell to him represents: eternal separation from God, just like he experienced and will experience forever. And so it's pride. It's absolutely pride. I think some of the biggest mistakes we can ever make are connected to our pride. Whether it's taking credit for something, whether it's thinking we're more than someone, this is not the way of Jesus. And it's the fastest way to fall.
Yeah. That's right. Pride comes before destruction. It precedes destruction, and a haughty spirit, the scripture says, comes before a fall.
That's right.
Yeah, we can't move past that. We can't move past that from the perspective of many of us said, yep, that's my 6th grade memory verse. Here we go. Let's go. You know?
Yeah.
I want to go back to the moment you were saying, and again, to the extent you're comfortable sharing, Preston, I'm so thankful for your transparency in this conversation, but this Isaiah 6 moment that you had with the Lord, to the extent you're comfortable, what's the hardest area of your own life where the Lord has pruned you?
Yeah. Well, I've tried not to hide it from our church. When I was a young man, I was an absolutely unbridled, arrogant liar. I mean, we're not talking about a small measure of pride. We're talking about, that was part of the deal. I felt Saturday, the Lord showing me kind of his expression back in my earlier years while I was choosing my pride over my proximity to him. Because scripture is really clear. Psalm says he knows the proud from afar. There's a distance that my pride creates between me and him. And it wasn't just an awareness of my sin that I felt. It was his grief over the distance that I willingly created. And you got to know this about me. My number one obsession is by the end of my life, I want God to consider me one of his friends. I don't just want to be one of his children. This is the obsession of my life. And to think about the grief that he feels when we willingly create distance between him and us. That's what sin does. And my sin was pride. And you know this with all those you work with. Pride is just a cover up for insecurity. It's just a way we try and convince people. We deflect from what we actually believe is true about us. So we build up these
ego scaffolding. Oh yeah,
pictures of ourselves.
Yeah,
to try and hide what we think is the truth about ourselves. And so he stopped at nothing to cause me to fall on my face at his feet. And so that pride was the thing for me, man.
I was thinking the other day about deception, misconceptions, and I think it was Tozer that talked about what we believe God believes about us is the most important thing in life, or something to that effect. I may have it totally wrong, so we'll find out.
He said the number one question that every believer must answer is, what is God like?
There it is.
That was his famous phrase, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day about, because truth itself, and folks key in on this, truth itself, by nature of truth, doesn't necessarily set us free. It's the knowledge of truth. It's abiding in his word.
It's great.
Knowing truth. So I was thinking, Preston, about it's not just what God thinks about us. It's what we think God thinks about us, what
Right.
we believe God thinks about us. How does someone recognize when their insecurities are driving the narrative in their life? You were talking about insecurities moments ago.
Yeah. Well, I think first, the easiest way is when you're going in the wrong direction. Anytime I'm going in the wrong direction, it's in part because something is causing me to, I am allowing to be led this way. And it's in the opposite direction. He's trying to lead me. Well, if the Spirit of God's trying to lead me this way, then it stands to reason my flesh. I mean, what does Paul say? The very thing I want to do, I don't do. And that which I don't want to do, I end up doing. These things are at war with one another. In other words, going in the opposite direction. My insecurities always led me in the opposite direction God wanted me to go. So I think that's the easiest way to know if insecurity is, because here I'll give you a practical example. Insecurity needs to be noticed. There is something in insecurity, and so we trumpet, we brag, we do whatever we have to do to be noticed. And yet we serve the one who consistently got away from the crowds to be alone with his Father. And when the disciples said in Matthew 6, teach us how to pray, what did Jesus say? He said, go away by yourself. Get away by yourself. Insecurity actually doesn't want to go away by yourself. Insecurity wants the crowds to notice them. And Jesus flips that script on its head and says, no, go in the opposite direction of that. When you're a secure son or daughter of God Most High, you'll have no problem sneaking away from the crowds, calling your name to be alone with the one who created you before anyone gave you a name.
We'll start to land the plane here. You were talking about your top goal for life, your number one desire, and I want to ask you about the things that you're doing to finish well. I think many of us listening to this conversation are saying, "Yep, Preston, you're hitting midlife now." The reality is just perhaps more pronounced than it was in your 20s. At least it is for me.
Sure, it is. Yeah.
One of my top goals is to finish well in life. We read the scriptures. Solomon didn't finish well. Noah didn't finish well. The list goes on. What is Preston Morrison doing to finish well in life?
It's a really good question. I think there are two thoughts that I have. Mm-hmm. One, you mentioned Solomon.
Yeah.
Just before David dies, mm-hmm. he's sitting with Solomon, and it's one of those, I have one more thing to tell you before I go type mm-hmm. moments. Mm-hmm. And he says to Solomon, now think about this. This is the greatest king Israel will ever have, not named Jesus. This is the greatest warrior that they had. This is the wealthiest man on the planet. Remember, 1 Chronicles 29, he gives what many present-day theologians say is $250 billion offering to the Lord.
That's insane.
Elon Musk's entire wealth.
Exactly.
David wrote it in a check to build the temple, okay?
Yeah.
David could have said, here's how you become the richest man in the world. David could have said, here's how you become the greatest warrior in the world. David could have said, Solomon, here's the one thing you must do to become the greatest king in the world. Here's what he says. There's one more thing I want to tell you. Get to know the God of your forefathers intimately. This is the key to life. If you will become friends with the King of the cosmos. And so I think, going back to a verse you quoted, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Only those with clean hands and a clean heart. I feel like the Lord laid it out for me the way I would know I finished well. It wasn't accolades. It wasn't how many people I've helped. It wasn't how big the church would be at the time of my retirement. It wasn't how many books I write. I felt like the Lord made it really clear. Preston, here is my definition for a successful life. You finish with clean hands and a pure heart. And if you want a really big goal, your hands are cleaner and your heart is pure than they were even on your first day, however many years before my start was before my finish. So that for me that's my aim. Every year I want my hands to get cleaner and my heart to get purer.
What's the connection between those two factors? And as he finishes that thought in the psalm about rejecting that which is false, the soul that does not lift itself up against that which is false. Because that requires us to be able to detect a counterfeit first.
Sure.
What's that about?
I think the greater the distance between us and him, the easier it is to live a lie. And the nearer I draw to him and the nearer he draws to me in response, the more difficult it is to live a lie. So you're talking to a man who, as a boy, was a liar, who lied more than anyone in his life, and didn't honestly know how to break the habit of habitual lying. And the way the boy learned how to stop living the lie of telling lies was to chase closer and closer and closer and closer to his side. And as I've tried, the harder it gets to live that which is false or according to that which is false. You can't live a lie when you fall asleep with the truth. And David in Psalm 139 said, "And when I awaken, you are there." And David paints this picture of God standing over him all night long, staring at him. When you fall asleep with truth staring you in the face, it's really hard to wake up and live a lie.
I think that's the period on the sentence. You can't live a lie when you fall asleep with the truth. Anything else today, Preston? I'm really humbled by your generosity in this conversation today and just want to thank you.
Well, I appreciate your heart and the desire to help people. And, I think we're at our best when we try and stay out of the way. And so it's been a privilege just to get to sit with you, and I'll do it anytime you ask. It was really fun.
Thank you. Hey, tell folks where to stay connected with you.
Yeah, I pastor a church called Pillar Church in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then we do a weekly podcast called The Leader's Cut. And we're just trying to help people. So
it's really been a joy, Preston. Thanks for being here.
Enjoyed it immensely, my man.